You've recently been adopted as a parliamentary candidate for the Ulster Unionist Party. You're a military leader. You become a successful businessman. You've written a book. You've made documentary films. Why politics?
Well, I was actually approached by the political parties across the board from the unionist side to do this. It's not something I came up with myself. And having looked at it, I thought that actually Northern Ireland is being left behind. The people of Northern Ireland have gone without an assembly, which means that for nearly 2 years now, which means that the services and more importantly, the pay for the carers and the nurses and the council workers has lagged behind the rest of the United Kingdom, and it's simply not fair. And moreover, Northern Ireland is not really, its voice isn't being heard in Westminster sufficiently to bring the benefits of the United Kingdom to the people of Northern Ireland. And for that reason, I decided it's something that I could do something about, and I would do something about.
Perhaps one of the reasons that the voice of Northern Ireland isn't heard as loudly as it might be might not be to do with Westminster itself, but to do with the fact that the Stormont Assembly hasn't sat for ages. Now, we understand the Democratic Unionist Party's meeting tomorrow. We are led to believe to discuss the question of whether they might move to re-establish power sharing at Stormont. First of all, do you know if that's true? And secondly, if that is the case, do you think that's the right thing?
I think getting the Assembly back up and running is the right thing. Yes, I think Brexit was done on the rush. I think that the protocol wasn't properly thought out. It has marginalised Northern Ireland's place in the Union. And these are things we need to address. But we also need to have the Assembly up and running. And as an illustration of where we've got with that, and I'm optimistic that the DUP will go back into power sharing, but there's been many false dawns. But Sir Geoffrey Donaldson made an impassioned speech last Wednesday in the House of Commons. And it was widely reported in Northern Ireland. It was in what everybody else missed that struck me in the eye is when the camera zoomed back, the only people in the entire chamber were a couple of sentries on the opposition benches and on the government benches, and the rest was empty, except for a handful of Northern Ireland MPs. That's what Westminster thinks of us. So we need to change that, and that's something I think I can do.
Well, indeed, and it's interesting that you have this faith in politics. Many people would say right now that there's, if you like, a fall-off in the belief of the public that politics can actually change things, particularly whatever happens at Westminster. What makes you think that this is the best way? You've got a big voice, whether you're an MP or not.
Well, the part of Northern Ireland's issue, in my view, is the woeful voting record. Something like, across the board, something like 60% of people, 59% of people don't vote. And if you don't vote, you get what you get. And so one of the things that I'm determined to do is to reach out to the people in particularly North Down, which is somewhere where the wealth creators of Northern Ireland go to sleep at night. And I want to persuade them to come out and vote and have a voice and use our collective ability to create better conditions for the people in Northern Ireland, and also to create jobs that are sustainable, well paid, and meaningful jobs. And when I was visiting Bangor in Northern Ireland recently, and it's somewhere I knew very well growing up. I'm coming home to North Down, but I look at the Queen's Parade, which anywhere else in the country on the seafront of a seaside town would be vibrant. It's derelict. In the mainland, and GB, ground is the expensive thing. They've got the ground there. It's a bare car park, and the regeneration, the money that's needed from that doesn't just come from Northern Ireland. It'll come from America and Europe.
Okay. You first came to prominence, obviously, as a military leader. The biggest challenge that you might face, were you still in the forces today, would be what's happening in the eastern border of NATO, Russia. Do you think that we are ready, fit to play our part in the defence of Europe?
We are in this country absolutely not ready. Our military is a shadow of itself. Our two of our biggest assets, the two aircraft carriers, are tied up alongside in Portsmouth when we have a crisis in the Red Sea. I think what we have to do is to waken up and realize that the battle that the Ukrainians are fighting for their liberty through the illegal invasion from Russia, that if they do not win that, we're next. And we're, first of all, we're not sufficiently supporting the Ukrainians towards the victory that is essential to us as well as them. And secondly, we're not making any provision for the case where they would fail and they collapse and we're next. And we need to be doing both of those things. So we need to up our game in terms of supporting the Ukrainians, that they can find a just peace and liberate their country, every inch of it, from Russian occupation. And secondly, we need to be prepared to defend ourselves, because as Field Marshal Henry Wilson, who also stood as a candidate in North Down, once said, it's useless having an army big enough to invite trouble, but it's not large enough to do anything about it. And that's where we're at the moment. So we're going to have to up our defense spending. At the same time, we're going to have to increase our support for the people of Ukraine, that they can win their victory on our behalf.
There's been a bit of talk this week about the possible return of conscription. Briefly, can you ever see circumstances in which that might happen?
We may have no choice. The recruiting system that the armed forces has failed miserably. And in reaction to that, the government just keeps renewing the contract. When I was a commanding officer, I took a battalion over that was 250 undermanned. I threw out another 47 odd undesirables. And I then went out and recruited to full strength within 2 years. It can be done. But what can't be done is through the current contracts, which have clearly failed. And if they can't recruit, we'll have to go to conscription. I'd prefer not to, but that's the only alternative.